China's Mars rover didn't just land safely, it uncovered evidence that completely rewrites Mars's history, and what it found has left NASA scientists deeply unsettled. 1. China's first Mars rover beat the odds and made history. When China launched the Tianwen-1 mission in 2020, most experts quietly doubted it would succeed. Mars is unforgiving. Nearly half of all missions ever sent there have failed. Yet China attempted orbit, landing, and rover deployment in one single mission, something even NASA took decades to perfect. The rover, named Zhurong, touched down in Utopia Planitia, a vast flat region in Mars's northern hemisphere. This was not a random choice. Scientists believed this area once held a massive ocean billions of years ago. Unlike NASA's Perseverance rover, which landed in the dangerous Jezero crater, China chose safety first. And that decision paid off. Zhurong rolled down its ramp and became only the second space program in human history to successfully operate a rover on Mars. For a nation attempting this for the first time, the achievement alone shocked the global space community. But what came next mattered far more than the landing itself, because Zhurong wasn't just driving. It was seeing beneath the surface into Mars's hidden past.
There is a Chinese robot on Mars, and it's discovered some very strange and new things about the red planet. Like, is there life on Mars? China might have the answer. This is Zhurong. As far as rovers go, it's about medium-sized, basically a copy of NASA's old Spirit and Opportunity vehicles from 2004, but it's still pretty impressive for a first attempt at landing on Mars.
2. The radar discovery that changed everything. Unlike earlier rovers, Zhurong carried ground-penetrating radar, allowing it to scan deep below the Martian soil. As the rover moved across Utopia Planitia, the radar began detecting something no one expected. Beneath the dusty surface were 76 distinct underground layers, buried between 10 and 35 meters deep. These layers weren't random. They were tilted at an angle, all sloping in the same direction, exactly like ancient coastal sediment on Earth. This pattern only forms when water flows repeatedly over long periods of time. Not a single flood, not a short event, but tens of millions of years of active water movement. In simple terms, Zhurong wasn't sitting on dry land. It was parked on the remains of an ancient Martian coastline. That alone was stunning. But scientists quickly realized something even more disturbing. Mars may have stayed wet far longer than anyone believed.
But these changes in seasons are happening over incredibly long periods of time, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. Now, what is driving that change? It's most likely the result of small variations in the orbit and rotation of Mars. Something very similar happens to the Earth, and we call this process the Milankovitch cycles. They're governed by 3 major changes in the Earth's movement through space, all of which affect how much radiation we receive from the Sun.
3. Evidence that Mars had water, much later than NASA thought. For decades, the accepted belief was simple. Mars lost its water over 3 billion years ago, turning into the frozen desert we see today. Zhurong shattered that timeline. The deepest hydrated layers pointed to massive floods around 3 billion years ago, expected. But the upper layers told a very different story. They showed clear signs of another major flood around 1.6 billion years ago. That's not a small difference. That means Mars may have had liquid water over 1 billion years longer than scientists assumed. On Earth, life began thriving in oceans around that same time, which raises an uncomfortable question. If Earth had microbes, why not Mars? This discovery forced scientists to reconsider whether Mars' dead period was actually much shorter, or whether Mars was periodically coming back to life.
But what did it find? 76 underground layers of hydrated minerals shaped like an ancient coastline. This is evidence of massive floods that happened not just once, but twice. One around 3 billion years ago and another 1.6 billion years ago, which is way more recent than scientists thought Mars had water. But then it gets weirder. Zhurong found hard, salty crust on Martian dunes.
4. The strange salty crust that shouldn't exist. As Zhurong continued exploring, it climbed small sand dunes, about 30 meters long and 1 meter high. That's when it found something truly bizarre. The dunes were coated with a hard, crackly, salty crust extending up to 8 centimeters deep. On Mars, this makes no sense. The planet's violent dust storms should destroy any crust forming slowly over time, which means this crust formed quickly. The only explanation? Liquid water soaked the dunes, then evaporated, leaving salt behind like cement. Even more shocking, Chinese scientists believe this may have happened as recently as 400,000 years ago. At the same time, early humans and Neanderthals were walking Earth, Mars may have been experiencing snowfall. That discovery alone redefined Mars as a planet that wasn't just anciently wet, but recently active.
Zhurong continued to move through the desert and began to study these long, low sand dunes on the surface. The dunes are about 30 meters long and just 1 meter high, so it was easy enough for the robot to reach the top of the sand pile, and it found something very unusual. The dunes were covered in a very hard, crackly, salty crust that runs as deep as 8 centimeters into the sand.
5. How Mars' climate cycles made water return again and again. So what caused Mars to repeatedly thaw, flood, and freeze? Scientists believe Mars experiences long-term climate shifts similar to Earth's Milankovitch cycles, slow changes in orbit, tilt, and rotation that alter how much sunlight reaches the poles. When conditions align just right, ice at Mars's North Pole may partially melt, releasing water vapor, snowfall, and temporary liquid water across the surface. These cycles don't happen every year. They unfold over hundreds of thousands to millions of years. But over geological time, they may have created multiple habitable windows, moments when microbial life could survive, adapt, and evolve. And that brings scientists back to an uncomfortable possibility. Maybe Mars didn't just almost have life, maybe it had life, and we just weren't ready to recognize it.
And this creates seasons on Mars, and at least one of those seasons probably includes snow. But these changes in seasons are happening over incredibly long periods of time, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. Now, what is driving that change? It's most likely the result of small variations in the orbit and rotation of Mars.
6. Did NASA accidentally kill Martian life before China arrived? Long before China reached Mars, the United States had already been there. In 1976, NASA's Viking landers touched down, including Viking 2, which landed in the same region where Zhurong would later explore. Viking performed a bold life detection experiment. Scientists added water mixed with nutrients to Martian soil, expecting microbes to consume it and release carbon dioxide. The result? CO2 was released immediately. At first, this looked like proof of life. But when NASA repeated the experiment with more water, the CO2 levels dropped. NASA officially declared Mars lifeless. Case closed. But years later, scientists began questioning that conclusion. Mars is incredibly dry. If microbial life evolved there, it might not survive sudden exposure to water. In other words, NASA may have drowned Martian microbes instead of feeding them. Zhurong's discoveries of long-lasting water cycles and hydrated minerals reopened this old wound. Suddenly, Viking's results didn't look like failure. They looked misunderstood, and that realization has made American scientists deeply uncomfortable.
Part 2 of the experiment was to squirt more nutrient water into the same material a little later, with the idea being that the now thriving colony of bacteria would produce even more CO2. But that was not the case. It turned out the more water they added, the less CO2 was produced. This led NASA to conclude no aliens. But that has not stopped researchers from speculating over the years.
7. Why China's simple landing strategy was actually genius. NASA uses sky cranes, airbags, and complex systems to land massive rovers. China went old school. Zhurong used a parachute, followed by retro-rocket braking and shock-absorbing landing legs. The same basic method Viking used 50 years earlier. Many critics called it outdated. But here's the truth. Mars's thin atmosphere makes parachutes difficult, yet China calculated the rover's lighter mass perfectly. The result was a flawless landing with minimal risk. This conservative strategy allowed China to focus resources on science instead of spectacle, especially radar scanning. And while NASA chased dramatic terrain, China quietly uncovered Mars-buried coastline. Sometimes simpler isn't weaker. Sometimes it's smarter.
Then maybe it wasn't equipped to binge on nutrient-rich water. Maybe what we actually did was drown the aliens. At least they died well fed. Either way, that's just to illustrate that there was always potential for China to find something incredible with their Mars rover, even if it wasn't out there rambling over mountain ranges.
8. Zhurong survived far longer than anyone expected. Zhurong was designed for 90 days. It survived 358 days. That extra time is why we even know about most of these discoveries. The rover endured freezing nights, radiation, and constant dust storms, the biggest killer of solar-powered machines on Mars. In May 2022, China deliberately shut Zhurong down to wait out a massive dust storm, hoping it could restart later. It never did. But by then, its mission was already a success. Zhurong had delivered data that forced scientists worldwide to rewrite Mars's climate history. The rover didn't just exceed expectations, it outperformed history. 9. Why these discoveries terrified scientists in the USA. China didn't just find rocks, it found timing. Water on Mars existing as recently as 400,000 years ago is scientifically shocking. That's yesterday in planetary terms. It suggests Mars may still experience episodic habitability, brief windows where life could survive underground, protected from radiation. This challenges decades of NASA research and forces uncomfortable questions. Were we looking in the wrong places? Did we assume Mars was dead too early? And did China just stumble onto evidence we missed? The fear isn't political, it's scientific. Because if China brings back soil samples in 2028 and finds organic biosignatures, Mars history will forever change, and so will humanity's place in the universe. 10. 2028. The mission that could prove we're not alone. China isn't stopping. In 2028, Chinese robots will return to Mars, not just to explore, but to bring Martian soil back to Earth. This would be the first Mars sample return mission ever completed. Unlike rover experiments, Earth laboratories can test for fossilized microbes, organic molecules, isotopic signatures of life. If anything biological exists, even ancient, we'll finally know. And if Mars once hosted life, even briefly, then life in the universe may not be rare at all. It may be inevitable. China didn't just explore Mars, it reopened humanity's biggest question. If life once existed there, then Earth may never have been special at all. Hit like, share, and subscribe for cosmic updates.